Widget Factory. So as you can see, our factory is just lovely. I do not know how this graffiti artist got up this high, but hey, whatever. Anyway, so we're going to create this site. I want you guys to look at, I've mentioned this in other tutorials that I've done, but I want you to look at the structure of the web page. If you do your mock-ups first, digitally or hand-drawn, you can structure your pages so much faster. I mention this all the time. Just please do not start off, just coding. It'll take you longer. If you look at something and you design it and lay it out, you can look at something and make it faster. So anyway, so let's look at this page. Up here at the top, we have a nav bar. Okay, and you have the Widget Factory name over here in the navigation. Here you have, I'm going to call this the header. That's where the image is. A lot of people might call that a scroller area or whatever, but this, for us, we're going to call this header. This is going to be the subheader where the home is. You have your content area down here where this content will change. And then you have your footer area. So if we look at this, let's break this down to the smallest factor, right? So you have one container that centers everything on the stage. So that's one. Okay. Then you have three elements on the stage that all look the same, and that's the brown bar. Okay. So that's an element that we can style with one class in CSS. Okay, then you have the content area, then you have the header. So now that we kind of know what this is doing, we can lay it out. We need a container that holds everything. We need a class that styles the three bars. Okay, and then we need the content area and image. Pretty easy, right? So you have container, nav, header, sub, content, and footer, and then you need a class that styles all three of these components. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to use Dreamweaver for this tutorial. As you've noticed in the past, that's what I always do. It's not my editor of choice, by the way. I use PHP Storm for my professional projects. But if you want to use something close to PHP Storm and not pay for it, that would be Aptana. That does a good job. There's a lot of other free ones out there. But Sublime Text is a good one, but you have to pay for it. You don't have to, but you should. Anyway, you can use whatever you want to do this stuff in. I just use Dreamweaver. A lot of people, beginners trust Adobe. So anyway, that's what we're going to use. So here we go. We're going to actually create a site. Now, why do I do this in Dreamweaver? I like to do this because it keeps all my files in one area. And what I mean by that is I can see them all inside of Dreamweaver. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to find this. Let me see, 215 Widget Factory. So I'm going to make this my root folder right here, okay? And I need to specify my image folder. Now I clicked on Advanced Settings, and that's it. I don't click on any of these other ones right here. Default image folder. Go here, and this is what I mean. So Dreamweaver now knows that Widget Factory folder is that's my root folder. So it'll always look inside of here first. So then I just select my image folder. Okay, now you can see that anytime I click on this file button, I can see all the files that are inside of my widget folder. I like that. I don't want to go search for it every single time that I have to create something. I want Dreamweaver to know where my site is. And that way when I create files, I don't always have to go search for them or browse for the folder to put them in. Okay, it just makes it a little easier. By the way, these images, I'm going to post them in a zip folder. I'll try to do the finished product as well, so you can see it. But I normally don't like to put the finished product up there because a lot of people just copy and paste, and I want you guys to work this out for yourselves. So, also, if you guys do like my tutorials, please sponsor me. Below in the description, there's a link to Patreon. Please sponsor me, even if it's $1. It helps me, and I'll get these ads off of YouTube. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Enough self-promotion, right? Okay, we're going to create an HTML page. If you've watched my other tutorials, first two things I like to do is give it a title, because these are the easiest things to forget, and save it. And we're going to call this index. Now, I've seen this a lot in the past. Because index is basically your home page, you do not name this home. It has to be named index, all lowercase. By default, when you go to widgetfactory.com or whatever you're going to, you don't have to put the index.html. It's by default will look for that file. If that, that's the reason why you name it index.html. So we're going to save it. Now, knowing that we've structured our page before, looking at it right here, looked at the structure, we know that we can go ahead and lay a lot of this stuff out. We always like to close my containers right, or my divs or sections or any tags right when I make it. Okay, and then we know that we need a nav up here at the top. Okay, so let's just go ahead and add the nav. I'm just going ahead and close these. The next thing you know, we need a header. That's where the factory image is going to be. So we're just going to name this header. Okay. Next thing you know, we need the subheader, right? So I'm going to give this a div here. Now you can make these sections if you want to. That's up to you. Okay. Close that div. Okay. The next thing we need is a content area, right? So we're going to give this content. Now, because we're going to make multiple pages, because we're structuring this one page first and then doing the rest, you should be able to just do a save as. And then after content, we're going to put a footer in there. Okay, so now we have our page structure laid out. Okay, now we know we're going to have to style these. So let's go ahead and create a style sheet. I'm going to come over here and create a new CSS style sheet. First thing I'm going to do is save this style sheet. I'm going to name this styles. Now, you guys know that I like to keep my projects organized, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called CSS, and I'm going to save this file inside of that folder. Okay, so if you come over here to our files in Dreamweaver, you'll see that we have a CSS folder, and the styles are inside of there, right there. Okay, so it just keeps it organized. All right, so let's go ahead and lay some stuff out. First off, only use this star. You guys may have seen me use this a lot. I just use this to set the margin. Okay, and I'm going to actually, if you don't know what this will do, I'm going to wait for just a minute. Okay, and we're going to need the body. We're going to have to style the body at some point. So now I'm just structuring my CSS. Okay, now we have a nav. Okay, so we have a nav in here. Okay, we have a header. We know there. Okay, we also have a subheader. Now, up here, you'll notice that we're styling the elements tags, right? Down here, our container is an ID, so we have to put the hashtag in front of it. Okay, and then after the container, okay, actually the container is before any of this. So let's come up here. I like to do it in order. So we have the container, and inside the container you have nav, and then you have header, and then you have subheader. By defining these all first, we'll make Dreamweaver know about them, so it'll be easier to implement them later. Okay, so then you have the content area. Okay, and then after content, we have the footer. So we have our basic structure for our CSS. Now, inside of here, there's a couple things if we look at the image. One is we know that this container is centered. Now, in this example, it is 960 wide. My screen resolution, so you guys can see this bigger, I've had to make it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to make my width of this container a little bit smaller, and it's going to be 800 pixels. Okay, and you can actually do a max width if you wanted to, so we can try to keep it responsive a little bit. Now that we have a width, we're going to center it. Now, in order to center something, you have to set the width, and you set the width to 800 or whatever you want it to be, and then you set the margin to 0 and auto, and that way it will center. Now, in order to do a little bit of testing, let's just give it a background color. Okay, and pick anything you want. In here, I'm just going to pick this light blue. You won't see this color, by the way. And because by default a div has no height at all, we have to give it a minimum height in order to see this. Okay, so now we have the width. Okay, you need to set a width to center it, or it's just going to go 100%. And the max width means that the maximum width of this div will ever be is 800 pixels. Okay, if you just set the width, means it's going to stay 800 pixels regardless of whatever the browser size is. Okay, we don't want that. We want it to only go to 800 width, but we can let it shrink if we want it to. Okay, now you need the margin 0 auto, and that centers it. Then we need the background color and the min height so we can see it. So let's go over and see what we've done. First things first, we need to link this. Now, you can do it a couple different ways in Dreamweaver. You can come over here to CSS and then click on this link button. But I'm going to tell you that Dreamweaver is notorious for not linking your file inside of there. So just don't even try to do it. Just get used to typing this out. You can browse for it, and if you did it right, it'll find it really quick for you. And you put the type in there, and the type is that. We put the relationship in here, and it's a relationship as a style sheet. Okay, and this link on anything else, we should see our style sheet pop up here. Okay, so let's just click on files, and you'll notice that now in this top tab we have our files, so we can close this if we wanted to. Okay, let's view this and see what happens. View this in Firefox. Now you'll see the big blue box. This is our container. Now you'll notice this has a margin at the top. Because we're centering this, we're not really worried about the margins on the left and right, but I hate this margin at the top, and it's by default with the browsers, and that's why you'll see a lot of people just automatically reset these margins. So I'm just going to reset the top, and you'll notice that once I do that, I went in here and put it in the star. That's the only thing you put in the star. Don't do anything else right now. Come back and refresh, and you'll notice that that took that margin away up at the top. Okay, so we got that away. Now our site's going to be right up against the top. All right, so we got our container. It's growing. Let's look at a couple other things that we know we're going to need. Okay, the text is all white. That's on the whole page. Nothing's black. So let's go ahead and inside the body, we'll put color, and we'll make it white. Okay. Now, all the font will be white except for the links, and let's go ahead and do some of those. So the anchor tag, we're going to style our anchor tags, and we're going to make those color of white. Okay, and they also have no underline underneath them, so let's just go ahead and give it a decoration of none. Now we have not added the links yet. We're just setting the styles first. Okay, so we got that. Here's the links. They're going to be white, and they're going to be with no underline. Okay, so we got the white for the whole font, got the anchor tags being white. Now let's make this brown bar class. Okay, you could do a hover if you wanted to, but we're just keeping this short. Okay, brown bar. Now, a couple things that you notice, all of them are about 35 pixels tall, so that's perfect. So let's just give them a height 35 pixels. Okay, now you're going to notice that in order to center the text in this line, you need to do a line height. And the way this works is you just set it to the same as the height, and that will center your text vertically. Okay, and now we need a background color. And we're going to find this dark brown here. Okay, and now all we have to do to make these class is to add them to our code. So the nav bar has this, right? Class, brown bar. The subheader has it, so we just add that class to it. And the footer is also styled that way. Okay, brown bar. Now when I refresh this in Firefox, it's going to look like just one big chunk of brown. Okay, but it's not. So let's refresh this. There's actually a header, there's a subheader, and there's a footer here. It's just we have nothing dividing them up, so they're stacked against each other. But we're going to add some content right now. So in our nav, let's go ahead and add the links. Now notice I'm stair-stepping and formatting my code, all right? So in this example, we're just going to do just the pound symbol. Actually, since this is the home, we can actually do this. Okay, and then we just put home and close it. And then we can copy and paste this. Okay, let's do it 4 times. This next one's going to be about. I think this next one is contact. And this last one, let's just, if we make it just like the images, it's products. Okay. Okay, and now I'm just going to take these other pages out because I'm not linking anything. And we can put the hashtag in there or the pound symbol, and that just basically will let the link act like a link, but it won't go anywhere. Because if you actually put a name of a file in here and you haven't created it yet, it's going to give you a 404 page, so it's not going to look right. But this won't do that. Okay, so now we have our other 3 pages. And if we want to create an about page, if we have time, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Now, one thing that's nice about putting your file names in here is when we duplicate this page to make the other pages, that you already have everything in place. All right, so we have our links in here. Now we also, inside that nav, if we look at our picture, you have the widget factory name. So let's go ahead and put that in there. Okay, content area, let's not add anything right now, but we definitely know two things on the home page. You're going to have the left column and the right column. Okay, so I'm going to actually just do this real quick. I want to create a div. I'm going to call this with an ID. Ooh, ID. And we're going to give it, this is going to be the left column. That just is an L column. Okay, and then I'm going to create a div there with an ID, and I'm going to call this right column. Okay, and we'll just close that off. Okay, so my text will go in this left one, my image will go in this one, and actually we can just go ahead and add this image since we're doing it. Okay, and source, and we'll browse to that, and I think this one's called chairs. Okay, put an alt tag in there. I'm just going to call it chairs. You want to be a little bit more descriptive when you do this. Okay, now let's go ahead and just put the text in there as well. Okay, now I already have some Lipsum pulled up. I'm just going to copy that real quick, and I'm going to paste this in here. Now I'm going to show you a lot of editors or IDEs have this function. And Dreamweaver you can wrap this in a tag really quick. You just go to Insert. Now I selected all the text, Insert, HTML, Text Objects, and then right below there you'll see Paragraph. Just click it and it wraps that whole text inside of paragraph tags. Okay, we're going to do that again. HTML, Text Objects, and Paragraph, and it wraps it in a paragraph tag. Okay, now let's come over here to our style, and one thing that we didn't do is in our content area, let's just give this a background color because we want to be able to see this thing move around. Okay, and you can make it anything you want right now. So let's go back to our widget factory and look what we have. Oh, one other thing I want to do. We have all of our content in a footer. Let's go ahead and just put it in there. So 2014. Okay, we're going to do copyright. Probably do that another way. Copy. Okay, that does the copyright symbol. Okay, and then you're going to say the widget factory. Alright, so there we have our text. Let's see what it looks like now. Okay, we have our page pretty much structured, but we got some styling issues. Okay, here's our content area. The footer, look, all the text is aligned right vertically. It's perfect. Okay, it's perfect there. It's perfect here. Our image it's outside of the box, which we don't want. Okay, and we're going to have to rearrange this stuff a little bit. So let's get finishing styling the page. One thing we need to do is we need to move these A tags over a little bit. Okay, so we're going to pretty much spend the rest of our time in the style sheet. So let's work on the top. Okay, so the brown bar, notice they worked perfect just with one style class. So that's nice to do. So in the navigation, we are actually going to just copy this nav, and I'm just going to target the A tags that are inside of the navigation. Now you could, in this example, just style this A tag if you wanted to, but you should always target the one that's inside the tag, and that way you don't affect any other anchor tags on the page. And one thing we want to do here is we're going to add some padding left, and we're going to add 20 pixels. So let's see what happens. You'll notice that it moved it over. All of our anchors work, okay? But we got this widget factory right up against products, and we don't want that. As a matter of fact, this widget factory name, according to our image, should be over on the right hand side. So how do we do that? Well, you could do it a few different ways if you wanted to, but we're going to do float. Now we need to wrap this widget factory, we need to wrap this in something. By knowing how your elements and your tags are laid out or compiled to the page, this would tell you the tags that you need to use. For instance, if you wrap this word in a div, you're really going to have some issues. Okay, because a div is a block element, so it's going to want to break down to its own little line and everything else. So I don't want to do that. I want to wrap it in a span tag. Okay. And why is because a span holds no space. It'll just, all you're doing is using this tag to style this word right here. Okay, so if we come back come back to our Firefox and refresh, nothing has changed. See, that's a span, doesn't do anything. So we come back and now we can style that. So that span tag is actually inside of this nav. Now since we're not going to use this nav for anything else, I'm just going to actually target that here and just use that tag. And the first thing I want to do is just float it. Right. Let's see what happens. You'll notice that it went right over to the right side of the page. Perfect. And now we need to give it a margin, okay, right, of actually 20 pixels to make it look correct. Look at this. We've styled the top bar really fast. Okay, now let's deal with this image right here in the header. Okay, now the header, we don't have a width. We don't need one in there. But one thing that we are going to do is we're going to grab this header. I always like to leave that one there in this instance just in case I need it later. And we're targeting the image that's inside of header. And one thing we want our image to do is always be 100% of whatever the container that it's in, which is the parent, which is the header. Okay, so the image will always be 100% of whatever the header is. So let's see if this worked. Yes, it worked perfect. Notice how the header adjusted to the size of the page, it adjusted to the image closing down, so it actually moved up a little bit. Now one other thing we need to do is clear this margin up right here at the top of this subheader. So we're going to do this, come in here into subheader, and we're going to do margin top, and yes, you can do a negative. Now I know it's 6 pixels. Okay, so I think if you stay with 960 and don't adjust the image, it's 5 pixels. Okay, so the whole top of this now looks like our widget factory. Let's move this header around, or this subheader name around. Now if you know, just like what we did here with the widget factory, we can actually wrap this in a span tag. Okay, so we got that span, it's in the subheader, so let's come back here, and all we have to do is copy this, and we're going to target the span tag that's inside of the subheader, and you're going to actually add a left margin of 20. Now why am I coming up with 20? Because I want this to all, with our links in the nav, I want these to be lined up on the left hand side, and our left is 20 here, so I want to keep this 20. So we come back over here, and you'll notice that this all is right in line. Okay, so we have the whole top area done really quick. Now let's work on this next one, and this is going to be a little bit tricky. Okay, so inside of our content we have 2 extra IDs. We have a left column, okay, and we have a right column. Remember, we put those out on the state. Okay, now if we look at our image that's out there, you'll notice that it has a width. It has to have a width to only take up so much of the page, and this image has one. Okay, so let's come over here and look, and we want the left, or not the left, I'm sorry, that's the left column. Okay, we want the width of this, and we want it to be a percentage of the page. So let's say that it takes up 50% of the page, the width. So let's come back to our Firefox and see if it's made any changes. Okay, now you'll notice it does. Now we do not want this to be right up next to the top or left. So actually in here, I'm just going to give it a margin. And I want 20 pixels all the way around. Okay, now you'll notice, look at this. It actually moved away from the top. Okay, because this actually pushed the content away from the top. If you wanted to do something a little different, you could actually try to add padding inside of here, or just do top and left. But if you want to just leave this, you can. There's other ways. Let's take a look at this really quick. So inside of our content, what happens if you add padding and you say 20 pixels around inside of our content area? That works perfect as well too. Okay, so let's go with that, because the green went right up next to it. All right, here we go. So we added padding there. We got our width here. One thing we need to do is we need to get this image right here to go to the right hand side. Okay, so that means we have to float this text. Now there's a couple different ways to do all this stuff, but we're going to float left. Okay, and let's see what happens. Ooh, don't want to open up a new tab. Need to refresh it. Okay, there is our image. Look at this. It's perfect. Okay, and actually on this image, if we wanted to, we just add a margin left, and just move it out a little bit. That's it. We could just say 30 pixels. Okay, whoa, wait a minute. It didn't change. What happened? Margin left. Nothing moved on our right column. So let's check this again. Okay, 80. It's not moving at all. Okay, these are some issues that you have with positioning, and you're going to have that a lot. Okay, so by knowing how to fix those issues, so one, we could actually do a float right. Let's see what happens. Well, that really messed up our container, but it floated the image right. Okay, but it messed up the content, and now you see the footers up there. How do we fix that? Well, in our HTML, we come over here and look, and after you stop floating things, the next element right after these floating elements, which right column, left column, is the footer. If we come over to the footer and you just put clear both, what you're doing is clearing all the floats and telling the browser, hey, stop floating everything and go back to normal formatting. So let's see what happens there. Well, it worked. The footer's back to where it should be, but look at our content. The content's still acting up. Here's a little trick that you'll have to learn how to use it. But in order to get that, you can try everything, and if somebody has, a good explanation of this, please post it in the comments. But the best way to get this comment to go full height is to come up here to our content and add the overflow to auto. And now watch what happens. Okay, and now our content is back to being full length. So that's, if you want a different color behind it, there you go. Now you'll notice, here's our contents left, here's our image left. Let's come back to our page. And the reason why it's away from this edge a little bit is because we added that padding of 20 pixels all the way around. So we didn't even have to worry about that. It's already laid out. Okay, let's see if our pictures. Pretty darn close to what our image was, except for now let's deal with the footer. Okay, let's move this stuff around. Pretty easy. Come back to Dreamweaver. Now let's go into the footer. And these are going to be text align, and that's going to be centered. Okay, and the text is already white. And there it's centered. Now we just need our font size to be a little smaller, right? So let's say it's actually 11 pixels, because usually footer text is a little smaller. So there you go. And there's our site, the widget factory. Everything should work. Okay, now you're going to ask yourself, well, shoot, how do you create a page? Well, this is easy. How do you create another page? That's what I meant. You just go here to the HTML, do a file save as, and then just name this to about. Okay, and make sure it's in that folder, the root folder. And we already have this about HTML in there. So everything should stay exactly the same, except the subheader, you need to change that word to about. Okay, make sure it's cap. Okay, now our about page doesn't have any left column, right column in it. But what it does have is it does have an H1 in it. Okay, and I believe this says about us. And it does have a few lines of lorem ipsum. So I'm just going to go over to the index. I'm going to copy these two paragraphs real quick. And I'm going to add those to the about page. And let's just put 4 paragraphs to make it seem like there's a lot. Okay, now we come back here, refresh this page, and let's click on the about link. And you'll notice that this all changed down here for us. It's all laid out perfect because we spent the time to lay out the first page. Look, it doesn't go to the edge because we added the padding. Everything fits perfect inside of here. So we can go back home. Notice this change is still laid out nicely. About, come in here, and it's still laid out really nice. So, and let's see what happens if we make the page smaller. Let's see what happens here. It's responsive. Now, the widget factory dropped down, so we would have to work on that a little bit. But for the most part, you could view this on a tablet, a smaller tablet, and everything would work just fine. That's about. Let's check and see what home looks like. Now the home, we would have to work on this image. And the image right here, we could actually try to fix this really quick. And let's go to their styles. Now I'm doing this on a whim here. So that's in the content, and it's in the right column. Okay, so this, we need to target that image just like what we did over there or up above in the subheader or in the header, I'm sorry. We need to target that image. And instead of floating right, we're actually going to put width. And what happens if we just say 100%? Okay, we come back over here and refresh the page. Now it's not doing much right here, right? So a couple of things you can do is, one, our column doesn't have any width on it. So we could say that this width of this column is always going to be like 35%. Actually, we can just say 30%. Now let's see what happens. Now you'll notice the image got real small because it's always going to be 100% of that column. Okay, that works out perfect. Look at that. Now you can make your column a little bit bigger just as long as you don't make it over 50%. And you also have to think about the 20 pixels on both sides for the padding. Okay, so we could probably take this up to 40% and get away with it. Now look at our image here. It's perfect. It's big. It's just like what our image was over here. Okay, now there's a little bit more padding around this one, but you can make it whatever you want. Okay, now let's go back to Dreamweaver, or actually let's make this smaller and see what happens. Look at this. The image goes perfect. It stays exactly where we want it to. Everything is pretty much responsive. So we just actually created a nice responsive site. Go to About. This will all, as we get smaller, the text all wraps perfect. So there you have it. Hopefully this helped talk about how to lay things out. Very simple. If you look at the code, there's not much code to it. Very small style sheet to do that, and very, very small or a few tags. So hopefully that helped. And again, if you like these tutorials, help me out and go to Patreon and